Before beginning the story, I'd like to say a big thank you for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading alternate history-related stories every single day. If that sounds good, be sure to leave a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a whole lot when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. My mother wasn't a dramatic woman. She didn't talk about her feelings much, didn't leave long voicemails, didn't make a big deal out of birthdays or holidays. When she got sick, she called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said, "I've got something going on with my lungs, and I figured you should know." That was it. No tears, no build-up. Just the facts, delivered the same way she'd tell me the weather, or mention that the grocery store was out of something she needed. She passed in late October. Peacefully, the hospice nurse said, which I appreciated, even if I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. I'd been living 4 hours away for the better part of a decade, so when she died, I drove back to Hendricks Falls to sort through the house and figure out what to do with it. I wasn't planning to stay long, a week at most. Get the paperwork handled, go through her things, maybe talk to a realtor about what the property was worth and whether it made more sense to sell it outright or try to rent it. I ended up staying 6 weeks. Not because there was so much to do, though there was plenty. I stayed because of the knock. The house was a 2-story colonial on a dead-end street, the kind of place that looks different every time you come back to it after years away. Smaller, usually. The ceilings lower than you remembered, the hallway narrower, the kitchen counter at a height that surprises you because in your memory, it was higher, more authoritative. I had grown up in that house, slept in the same bedroom from age 4 until I left for college, and being back in it felt like putting on a coat you'd outgrown. Familiar, but wrong in some way you couldn't quite explain. The first night, I was exhausted in the boneless, total way that only grief and long drives can produce together. I had driven straight through after the service, skipped dinner because I couldn't face sitting alone at a table in the house. Went straight to my old room because my mother's bedroom felt like somewhere I wasn't ready to go yet. I fell asleep fast, dead to the world sleep, the kind grief sometimes gives you right at the start before it figures out what it's doing and turns into insomnia. I woke up at 11:15. One knock, solid and deliberate, from inside the wall beside my bed. Not a pipe settling or the house breathing the way old houses do in the cold. I knew those sounds. I'd grown up with them. This was different. This had intention behind it. A single, unhurried knock from somewhere behind the drywall, about level with my shoulder if I'd been sitting up. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, waiting for a second one. It didn't come. The house settled back into its usual quiet, and after a while my heartbeat slowed down, and I convinced myself I'd been half asleep and misheard something ordinary. I told myself it was the house. Old houses knock and groan and hiss. You know this if you've ever spent a night in one. I'd been away long enough to forget the sounds, that was all. I pulled the blanket up and went back to sleep. The second night, it happened again. Same time, same wall. One knock, clean and even, and then silence, so complete it felt almost deliberate, like whatever had made the sound was listening just as hard as I was. I sat up this time and put my hand flat against the drywall. It was cool and still. I pressed my ear to it and held my breath. Nothing. No movement, no vibration, no sound of anything living or mechanical on the other side. I knocked back once, feeling a little ridiculous about it, and nothing responded. Just the house around me and the wind pulling at the gutters outside, and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere down the street. I mentioned it to Deb Carlyle the next morning. She'd lived across the street since before I was born, and had brought over a casserole the evening before. She was the kind of neighbor my mother had kept in close contact with, the type who knew the rhythm of the street without being intrusive about it, who noticed things without making you feel watched. I asked her, as casually as I could manage, if she'd ever noticed anything unusual about the house. Noises, maybe. Anything my mother might have mentioned. She thought about it for a moment, stirring her coffee. Then she said, "Your mother slept with the lights on the last few years. I always figured she just didn't like the dark after your father died." She said it like it wasn't strange, like it was a completely reasonable explanation, and she'd never given it much more thought than that. Maybe it was reasonable, but my mother was not a woman who was afraid of the dark. She used to walk the dog at midnight without a flashlight. She'd grown up in a house without reliable electricity and always said darkness was just what the world looked like with its eyes closed. She was not afraid of it. I thanked Deb for the coffee and went back inside. There were boxes in the hall closet I hadn't touched since arriving, stacked neatly the way my mother stacked everything, labeled in her careful handwriting. Old photos mostly. My mother had been a dedicated picture taker when I was young, back before phones made it effortless, and taking a photo stopped feeling like it meant something. I spread the albums out on the living room floor and went through them slowly, looking at her face at different ages, trying to find some version of grief that felt manageable. I almost missed it the first time. In a photo from what looked like my 7th or 8th birthday, the one with the cake shaped like a baseball diamond and my hair cut too short, you could see through the open bedroom door at the end of the hallway, my old room, the wall beside the bed. There was a smear there, a soft blur along the surface of the wall that didn't match anything else in the photo. I turned it toward the window to get better light. It wasn't a shadow. The light source in the photo was on the opposite side of the room, and shadows don't work that way. It wasn't a reflection. There was nothing in the room that could have produced it. I found it in 3 more photos from different years. Always that same wall. Always the same vague, formless blur, like something was standing very close to the surface, and the camera had caught just the edge of its presence without catching the thing itself, like it existed slightly outside of what film could fully register. The oldest photo I found it in was from before I was born. My parents standing in that room when it was still a guest room, laughing at something happening outside the frame, my father's arm around my mother's shoulders. And there, along the wall to the left of where the headboard would eventually be, the same blur, not new, not recent, patient and present across decades of photographs, like it had never been anywhere else. I called my Aunt Roslyn that night, my mother's younger sister, who I'd maybe spoken to a dozen times in my entire life. She'd left Hendricks Falls when she was 17 and never really returned, not even for holidays or funerals, and I'd always assumed there was some old falling out between her and my mother that neither of them had ever wanted to explain. I found her number in my mother's address book, written in the same careful handwriting as the boxes in the closet. She picked up on the third ring, and when I told her where I was calling from, there was a pause before she answered. Not a confused pause, not the pause of someone trying to place who I was. It was the pause of someone who had been waiting a long time for a particular phone call and was now deciding how to respond to it. I asked her about the knock. She let out a breath, long and slow, like she'd been holding it for years. Then she said, "I wondered if you'd hear it." She told me she'd first heard it when she was 12. Their parents had given her the bedroom because she was older, and it was the larger of the two rooms, and she'd felt proud of that for exactly the first week before the knock started. She'd heard it every single night for 2 years, always once, always from inside the wall, always at the same time of night. She'd never told anyone because she was 12, and she didn't think anyone would believe her, and also because some part of her understood even then that telling someone would make it real in a way she wasn't prepared for. Then one night, after 2 years of lying there listening to it, tired and half asleep and more irritated than scared, she'd knocked back, one knock against the wall, and then she'd pulled her blanket over her head and gone to sleep. "It stopped," she said. "For almost a full year, it just stopped. I thought I'd solved it. I thought that was the end." I asked her what happened when the year was up. "It came back," she said, twice as loud, like it was making up for the time it had lost. Her voice was steady when she said it, the kind of steady that takes years of practice to maintain around certain memories. "I lasted 4 more months after that," she said. "Then I told your mother the room was hers. I never explained why. I moved into the smaller room and started planning how to leave as soon as I was old enough. I asked if she thought our mother had known, had eventually figured it out." There was a long pause. "I think she must have," she said quietly. "Why else would she sleep with the lights on?" I thanked her and sat in the kitchen for a long time after we hung up. The house was quiet around me. It was only 9. I had time before whatever was going to happen at 11:15. I sat there and thought about my mother and my aunt and how many nights that knock had pulled someone awake in this house. Always once, always patient, always waiting. I told myself I wasn't going to knock back. I'd heard what Roslyn said. I'd heard exactly what happened when she did it, and I was not going to make the same mistake out of frustration or exhaustion or some misguided idea that I could settle this the same way you'd deal with a noisy neighbor. I lasted until 11:15. One knock, the same as always. Deliberate and unhurried, from something on the other side of the drywall that had been pressing itself against that wall, night after night, for longer than I'd been alive. I raised my fist and knocked back once. The silence that followed felt different from the silences before it, denser somehow, like the air in the room had changed its quality, like the house itself had shifted its attention. I lay in the dark for a long time, feeling my heart beat in my fingertips, waiting for something I couldn't name. I slept better that night than I had since she died. Deeper and longer than I had any right to, given everything. For 3 days, nothing happened. No knock at night, no uneasy feeling when I walked into the bedroom, no sense of something present just beyond the drywall. The house felt lighter. I started catching up on the paperwork I'd been putting off and actually made progress on sorting through my mother's things. I called the realtor and scheduled a walkthrough. I even cooked a real meal for the first time since I'd arrived, standing in my mother's kitchen listening to the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood outside and feeling, for the first time, like maybe I could get through this. I told myself Roslyn had been a 12-year-old kid, that her memory had exaggerated things the way childhood memories do, that what had worked for me was simply going to stay working. On the fourth night, I woke up at 11:15, not to a knock from the wall, to a knock from under the bed. One knock, the same cadence, the same clean deliberateness, the same unhurried weight behind it. From the floor, directly beneath the mattress, not 3 feet below where I was lying. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I lay there with every muscle locked and waited. Then it knocked from the closet across the room. Once. A pause, just long enough to feel like punctuation. Then from the ceiling directly above me. Once. It was moving through the room the way you'd move through a space you'd never been allowed into before, methodically, slowly, like something that had spent decades pressed against a single wall and had finally been let through the door. I understood then, in the cold, absolute way you understand things, at 11:15 in the dark, that the knock had never been a threat. It had never been trying to get in. It had been asking. Every night for as long as anyone in my family could remember, it had been asking the same question. And I had answered yes. I left the house before sunrise with a bag I barely remembered packing. I drove back to my apartment without stopping and didn't look in the rearview mirror once the entire 4 hours home. I've spoken to the realtor twice since then. Both times I've found a reason to delay. I don't fully understand why I can't bring myself to go through with it. Maybe because selling it means someone else moves in. Someone who doesn't know to keep the lights on, who doesn't know what the knock is asking and what it means when it stops. Maybe because some stubborn part of me still thinks of it as my mother's house, and she lived alongside whatever that thing is for 30 years without running, and listing it for sale feels like a betrayal of something she chose to quietly endure. Or maybe I'm just afraid of what happens to something that patient when it no longer has walls to live inside. It's been about 3 months since I left Hendricks Falls. I've been sleeping fine, mostly. I've been telling myself the whole thing has a rational explanation I just haven't landed on yet, which is a lie I've gotten pretty good at telling. Last night, at 11:15, something knocked once on the wall beside my bed. My apartment is on the 4th floor. There is nothing on the other side of that wall but open air and a 4-story drop to the street below. I've been sitting here in the dark for 2 hours now, with my hand resting flat against the drywall, feeling nothing but cold plaster and the faint vibration of the city outside. I know I won't knock back. I know what it's asking, and I know what it means when you answer. But I keep thinking about my mother, all those nights alone in that house with the lights burning, whether she ever knocked back in a weak moment, in the dark, whether the year of silence she might have bought herself felt worth it, whether she lay in the quiet and tried to enjoy it, knowing what was waiting at the end of it. 11:15 tonight. I'll let you know if anything changes.